Hello, welcome to the OCTO Speaker Series. My name is Idan, and I'm with GitHub's Office of the CTO. We look at the future of development, developer experiences, and try to figure out how to make development faster, safer, easier, more accessible to more people in more situations, all that fine jazz. Today, we're trying something a little different. Our guest is GitHub star Sean Wang, better known by his internet handle swyx. And we'll also be joined by Brian Douglas, aka B. Dougie, who is a developer advocate and educator, my colleague here at GitHub. So excited for that discussion. I first met Swyx at a conference in the before times, before the corona, almost 2 years ago, when he was giving a talk about state machines for building CLIs. I knew of him in the context of his famous learning in public essay. And the talk that he gave was a fantastic demonstration of that, diving into an area where he had relatively little expertise and making sense of that territory and jumping back out to explain it to the rest of us. After his talk, he confessed to me that he's actually a refugee from programming Excel for finance. And I think coming out of that background, Swyx excels at finding that place of empathy for developers in the middle of the unglamorous, the hard parts of development, the parts that we don't like to show off to one another because they don't make us look smart. They don't make us look cool. His work normalizes the feeling of I'm stupid right now, which is very much a part of every developer journey and with which I identify very, very much. I think that's what makes his thoughts on community building so relatable and so topical. Developer-facing businesses have to find a way to channel empathy into action, and Swyx is figuring that out in all of its messiness in public for us to see and learn from. And in fact, the reason I reached out to invite him onto the show is this recent post that he wrote called Technical Community Builders, and looking critically at how that's different from the way DevRel is done today. And I think this is a very interesting take on the future of this business function for developer-facing businesses. Okay, so before I bring him on, I'll remind everybody that we have a code of conduct. It's really important to me that chat is a place where everyone feels welcome, so please make sure to make that possible. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Swyx and B. Dougie. Hello.
Hey, hey,
Hello.
hey.
Welcome,
What's up, everyone?
welcome. Swyx, you're out in Singapore, and it's like the middle of your night. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for this talk.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, I mean, I work Pacific hours, Pacific time anyway. So this is, I guess, the start of my day.
Okay, well, good morning to you then. B. Dougie, how you doing?
I'm doing perfectly fine. Enjoying my normal time of the day.
the morning that includes the day star. Fantastic. Swyx, you said that you wanted to give sort of a little bit of an upfront sort of mini talk about this before we dive into the discussion. Why don't I bring you on? There we go. Okay. So
Yeah.
like enlighten us.
I can't actually see the screen because I just have my slides full screen. So just pause me if there's anything. I just wanted to, I guess, set some context for people who may not have read the post. I think you and I and Dougie, like we've all sort of talked about community for a bit. So we may have more context than others. And so I just wanted to, whip up a few slides just to set some context, and then we can actually talk, because I'm very inspired by what GitHub does, and I'm definitely learning a lot from what you guys do for community. Okay, so why invest in developer community? A little bit. I feel like this is a bit obvious, but the reason I write, I would normally never write something like this because it just seems obvious. But the reason I write about it is I do a lot of conversations with startups, and sometimes for investing, sometimes just to give DevRel advice, sometimes marketing or whatever other network I can offer to startups. I often do that, but in the past week or so, like at least when I wrote that blog post, in 1 week I had 3 conversations that all ended in, can you help us find somebody to build developer community? And I was like, okay, this is not just like a one-off thing. This is a trend that a lot of startup founders are feeling, and there's no one really kind of dedicated to it. There are people, of course, but it's not like an industry trend yet. So I decided to write a blog post about that, and that's why I guess we're here today to talk about what's going on, why community is becoming more of a thing. It always has been a thing, but it's becoming more of a thing, and maybe professionalizing as well. So a bit of context about me. I think Idan already introduced me quite a bit. I did change careers at age 30, but I definitely owe a lot of my career change and learning to code and all that to community, right? I joined the Free Code Camp community. The Coding Blocks Slack group and podcast was also a very big part of companionship through the journey of learning to code, which was a very rough one, even for me. And then, of course, I also did a boot camp, which is a paid community, but one that's very, very focused on getting you hired. And that got me into Two Sigma, Netlify, AWS, and now I work at Temporal. I think what I'm better known for maybe in the community space is my volunteer work in this React subreddit, where I help to grow the subreddit from 40,000 developers to over 220,000 before I stepped down. I stepped down to basically because I started moving my interest to another front-end framework, Svelte. And I started that from 0 to now it's like 8 to 9,000 people. And I also run a paid community for learning in public. So I wrote a book, people liked the book, and then we chat about career related stuff in our Discord and in our Circle community. So that's my community credentials. I guess I should preface that. I guess I'm also, I had to put this here because GitHub at GitHub Universe did this really cool OctoCat thing here. So I just redid my profile as a GitHub OctoCat, which is really fun. And I was pretty honored to be invited as a GitHub star, which I think is a way that GitHub recognizes community members as well, which we can also talk about. Like, how do you recognize and promote and, I guess your super fans and and what does that really do for you? Okay, so I'll just blast through a few points, and then we can set it up for wherever you guys want to talk about. So to me, I think the main articulation that I want to have is like community is increasingly the moat of a lot of developer companies. So developers have always self-organized communities like IRC and BBSs, but now entire companies have communities where that's their entire moat. Like GitHub is essentially Git plus a social network, and it's real. Like anyone can offer Git, but it's a very hard proposition to replace a social network, and you find that the same for Stack Overflow. There's a question and answer site. Anyone can build that, but you cannot build a community. And same for Hacker News. So it seems like it's very a very key moat, and you would think that a lot more companies should be focused on that, but it doesn't seem so, at least in terms of hiring. When you look at job titles and stuff like that, they're more focused on like content creation and marketing, not so much community. And I think that's changing right now, and that's why I write about it. So that's the real question, like whose job is it anyway? There are community managers, but typically, we had one in Netlify. They're typically focused on grooming the forums and social media, like maybe making inoffensive posts or whatever. They can do it. They're capable of a lot more. These are just sort of stereotypical tasks that are assigned to community managers. And then developer advocates have a bit of community as well. They do a lot of content and outreach to other communities. So it's not so much forming your own community, rather than how do we reach out and present and be a part and meet developers where they are, rather than draw people to us. which there is a lot of as well, but they maybe don't have as much of a focus on sticking around and making interrelationships. Customer success is support, documentation, solutions engineering. All these are, community of people who pay you. And marketing, mailing lists, webinars, conferences. These are all, isolated communities of people who don't yet pay you but could pay you. And then I think there's also, apart from functional split, there's also sort of org chart split. And I do find that a lot of people who are sort of directly responsible for community are at the lower rungs of the org chart rather than at the upper rung. So it's pretty weird that it's just splintered all over the place. It's not really organized. Doesn't seem like sort of an organizational priority in a lot of the companies that I've seen. So the main realization for me is that community is basically part of the product. And in fact, in a lot of companies, it is the main part of the product, but it's under-resourced compared to product or engineering. And I think something that is key is like, maybe we should not call it just community management, even though that's a default title. So I offered a few suggestions, like community developer or community Tumblr. Tumblr is a word from I guess the circus. I took it from an Alex Hillman blog post, but essentially a Tumblr is someone who gets conversations going and then pieces out. So a lot of times community manager does a lot of the heavy lifting. But you need to, in order for a functional community to form into something that has many-to-many interactions instead of one-to-many, you need to have someone to create events where people feel safe and inspired and motivated to share and to help each other out. My preferred term right now is technical community builder, because it's very similar to technical product manager, which is an actual job title at Microsoft and Amazon and a bunch of other places. And it has an emphasis on technical. And there's a question of like, must they be technical? Of course not. Of course, you can have very, very good community builders and community managers who are not technical at all. But I think people who are technical have this extra dimension, which they can really empathize with developers on, and connect people, solve their problems right away. Basically, just be one of them. Like when you talk to someone who fundamentally empathizes with your problems as a developer, you share more and you have deeper discussions. And then the other question is, why must the title be different? I posit that it's very similar to the once-in-a-lifetime upgrade in status, impact, authority, and career prospects for ops professional when the DevOps movement got started. Like DevOps used to not be a thing. Now it's a very highly in-demand thing. And that's because it was a rebrand of existing skills that were around, but repackaged with new technology and a new focus in a lot of organizations that they realize that they need to invest in it. So I think a similar movement needs to happen, and you can't really rebrand something by calling it the same exact name. So that's why there's an opportunity to rebrand this discipline here. Okay, I'm very influenced by this model from ComStore, which is essentially the opposite of what I showed you earlier, where community used to be at the fringe, and you used to have all these other things sort of in control of community. And here, and the community-led model kind of inverts that, where community is at the core of everything, and from your insights from community and building relationships, you spin out marketing, you spin out products, you spin out sales, and so on and so forth. And I think it's very interesting migration from periphery to core, which I've been told actually is the same thing that's happening to data science. Data science, at least in the companies that I've worked with, used to be sort of a fringe thing where like it's a bunch of geeks, messing around with their analytics, to like now it actually is part of the reporting process that generates a lot of product and sales and marketing insights. And I think community can do that with humans. Not less data, but you can have a lot of data with it as well. So the question is, why invest in it? And really, I think my fundamental assertion is that traditional marketing and support isn't cutting it. This is the traditional idea of a marketing and sales funnel. You have awareness, evaluation, and conversion. And we, as developer relations people, definitely bias towards awareness, for better or worse. But I think it is only one part of the picture, and it's very transactional, right? You start at the top, and then you come out at the bottom as a salesperson, and then they're done with you. I kind of wash my hands off you, and you're handed off to someone else. The problems here are a few-fold, right? Like marketing, especially in developer marketing, has extremely long cycles. In traditional digital marketing, you need to touch, the traditional advice is that someone needs to hear about you 6 to 7 times before they even check you out. For me, I know a lot of technologies, I ignore them for a year just to see if they stick around. And if they're still relevant after a year, then I check them out. So try to do marketing attribution on that. Impossible. So very, very difficult, and not within any performance evaluation timeframe. And then also, what happens after I convert, right? What happens after I come out the funnel? Do I feel supported there? Do I grow and succeed and all that? So the solution is to change from mostly transactional finite games to relationship-based infinite games. And this is the bigger picture that I see. Kind of, there's marketing and sales going on here, but then it exists within a broader scope of community that kind of catches all the other stuff that isn't really handled by marketing and sales. Idan actually has loaded up the orbit model, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. So instead of the funnel, which is a very linear approach, the orbit model kind of so characterizes the people around your company as people orbiting your company, and they may be in wider orbits or they may be in closer orbits. Sometimes they may drop out, sometimes they may come back in. It's a very infinite relationship model where they're just constantly orbiting, and you're just trying to draw them closer with more and more gravity towards your software or your community. The reason I think it's important for startups in particular is that it's a very big part of crossing the chasm, because there's a small set of people who actually pick technologies based on pure technical merit, and there's a large set of people who pick technologies partially on merit, partially because there's a strong ecosystem, and there's a very, very big steep gap in between that, and people who can help companies cross this gap can deliver a lot of value for the companies involved, and that's a really core insight, I think. Okay, there's even more reasons in my blog post. I don't have time to go into all of these, but we can talk about them in a discussion. I don't want this to be a lecture. And I will refer, and I have a last part on why now, and I'll send people to the blog post if they want to see it. But that's my short little primer for my thoughts on community.
Fantastic. That was a solid introduction. One thing that really strikes me about what you're calling out here is that I can't highlight another area where there's a business motion that's so central to success, which is so undefined. Like, you think about most functions in a business, like marketing or engineering or product. And if I took 10 random people and asked them, what does this job entail? What does success look like? And how does it contribute to the success of the overall business? And I'll get 10 answers that are more or less the same. And here, I think what's sort of special, and maybe is in a difficult sense, is that I don't think that if I ask 10 people, what's the purpose of this business function? What does success look like? What does the job entail? What level of talent do we need to hire in order to accomplish this well? Even, things as boring as, like you say, sort of where on the totem pole, who's responsible for this and who do they report to? That level of definition. I don't think I'm going to get 10 answers that are mostly the same. I think I'm going to get 10 wildly different answers that don't resemble one another.
Yeah, if I could add to as well, this is something that's come up really recently for me because I shipped a YouTube video yesterday focused on what the future of DevRel looks like. So think about community and how that's sort of changed even in us being all remote. There's no real structure. I think everybody can kind of do something to move the needle, but I think the folks who are doing really good jobs is when you look at that model of the orbit, the folks, as you bring more and more people closer to the nucleus, they stick around longer. And I think one thing that Swyx and I had in common is that, well, a couple things we had in common. Like I was part of that React subreddit as well. We also spent time at Netlify. So like I've saw a lot of the same stuff that Swyx has saw, and what I agree with everything that he said too as well. And the things that I think I saw successful at Netlify is that we had a community of folks who were just really excited about the product, and we found ways to bring them closer to the inner circle, to the point where there are Netlify employees who came from that community. So when you think of like recruiting, or not just actually using the product, but if you're looking for your next advocate, it should come from the community that's already existent.
Yeah, I one of the points that I made was that if hiring is your biggest problem, just like 99% of other startups or companies in general, it doesn't have to be startups, then building a strong community helps you source a much higher quality of employee than just picking any random developer off the street.
I mean, yeah, like there's in the post you actually highlight that there's this sort of a litany of benefits, and I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I remember as I was reading through the post, excuse me, I thought that there was a lot more there than I expected. Like I expected going into it, it's just like, well, what benefits am I going to see from doing this well? Well, I'll do a better job at outreach. I'll do a better job at uptake of my product. But I hadn't thought of the hiring angle, even though that's it's plain right there in front of us. If you build a strong community, you have a very like high quality pool in which to sort of fish for standout employees. That it's a source of not exactly free marketing, but it's like you have a chance of growing a class of evangelists, people that are going to go out and spread the word about whatever it is that you're doing.
I've even
sorry, go ahead.
I've even gone one step further. So I took the hiring thing to the extreme. The startup that I work at right now, Temporal, we actually started listing jobs for our customers so that we can help them hire based on through us. So like, okay, if you don't work for us, but just come work at one of our customer companies, and it's just like like we win if they win, you know what I mean? And you can just take this to an extreme level where you just start becoming a de facto recruiting agency, if you're really good. But I do think that, like, if you do a really good job of community, actually the person's membership in your community actually outlives their present employer, and that's a really strong community. That's like, okay, I'm first and foremost a member of your developer community. Then secondarily, I just happen to be at this company right now. But I do have my primary network within your community. That's a really strong one.
And I guess, could I add, actually get some clarification too from you, Swyx? When you talk about these terms like DevOps, who, like, everybody knows what DevOps is now. It wasn't an unknown thing, 10 plus years ago. But when you build a community, like, what are some sort of like ways you can avoid those pitfalls? Because I know every time I go to an event and I join a random Slack channel for just that event, like, I leave that Slack channel as soon as it's done. So like, I'm curious what your thoughts are as far as building community from scratch.
Wait, are you saying that this is a problem with DevOps, or are you just saying...
sorry, I use DevOps because DevOps is a very clear term. There's already established community. But if I started BDuggy conference and wanted to everybody join the movement, like, it's going to be a challenge because it's going to be me and maybe a couple people in chat. So like, how do I make sure that this is not another community that's become stagnant or stale? Like, I want to create the next DevOps.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah. I think so. You and I, of course, we're very informed by our Netlify experience. For anyone who doesn't know, BDuggy actually started the whole DevRel practice at Netlify, and I basically, was 1/4 of his job after he left. Anyway, and something that Netlify did, which was brilliant, was that they didn't create the Netlify movement. They didn't create the Netlify conference. They created the Jamstack movement and the Jamstack conference. And I like this idea that you build something that's bigger than yourself. Like, you build a movement that other people can get involved with and see themselves in. to the point where they start competing with you, and you have to be okay with it. If you're so mission driven that you're okay losing because someone did your job better than you, then you've really found something that's worth building a community around. Because otherwise, it's just you're building a cult, I guess, where it's centered around you. And so I really like that. For example, I'll give you a concrete example, which is at, I think, our second Jamstack Conf at Netlify. We invited people from Microsoft, competitor in some ways, who did not use Netlify at all, did not pitch Netlify at all, but just presented their ideas on Jamstack. And we invited them as a speaker, and had, yeah, I mean, I think that we should have more, competitor companies also visited the conference as well. I think we should have more of that. I think it shows a fundamental level of security that you're like, okay, I'm not threatened by you, or like I care about this enough that this is big enough that multiple players can win in this space. That's a real community. Whereas a lot of other times you're just kind of running it to as a feeder service into your marketing funnel.
Yeah, I like the thought about building a community that's bigger than yourself. And I think, like, speaking from GitHub's perspective, because I was a longtime user, recently employed at GitHub in the last 3 years, not really that recent, but in startup worlds, that's like forever ago. But what I'm getting at is like the whole Git collaboration, open source protocol. Like, I like that GitHub didn't sort of try to strangle it and try to own it completely. There are other competitors that are doing a great job in having collaboration tools around GitHub, just Git in general. And that sort of funnel of new users, community, conferences, Slack rooms, Discords, it's been helpful for me in doing my job because there's already established community that I can just go in and not try to take leadership on, but more of like, hey, I want to learn from you as well.
Yeah, totally. I do think that at some level there's a transition from like, okay, this is bigger than yourself, but then at some point you're big enough that you are a community on your own. And I think once you're past like 50 million developers, you can have your own community. That's totally fine.
Thank you.
Which is the same thing for like Salesforce and Dreamforce and AWS and reInvent. Like we all, huge companies have their own conferences, and that's totally fine. But I think when you're getting things off the ground, it's a totally different story.
Yeah.
I think you touched on something interesting there about picking. It's always hard to sort of stay away from like blatant advertising when it comes to like developers. Like, who do I work for? What is it that they make? That's obviously going to be a central part of the discussion if I'm representing company X or Y. But you highlighted that for Netlify the story was not Netlify, it was Jamstack. For GitHub, it wasn't look at GitHub and our specific web app, but the collaborative nature of open source, specifically powered by decentralized version control, and like the Git is important. The pull requests are important. The rest of the stuff that GitHub brings is important, but it's not. That's not the thing that's going to emotionally resonate with people on its own. Not unless you have such a, so much of a better product that it's like, oh my God, people are wowed by just the existence of this thing, which is great. If you can pull that off, like more power to you. I think you touched on this sort of linear path. Okay, like you have a story, you tell it, and you think about this path that you want to take people, a journey that you want to take people along, that starts in sort of marketing territory and ends in sales territory, hopefully. And then by contrast, coming back to the orbit model, one of the sort of assertions you made there is that the orbit model is not strictly linear, that it has these other dimensions. It has this love dimension, basically like a measure of activity, and reach as a measure of influence. But when I still look at this model, it's still talking about these sort of concentric rings of, you start at the very outermost orbit, as just an observer, and ostensibly you move your way into the middle. That still seems like a relatively linear journey to me. I think it's curious, that they put advocates as the closest, the innermost ring, versus contributors. Because when I think about sort of like where do I spend the maximum amount of energy, it's in contributing. It's not in advocacy. It's really easy for me to advocate. I can advocate React until the cows come home, and all I got to do is write like nice things about React. But contributing to React, that's already like an effortful activity. So I'm curious, sort of, about that journey. Like, what do you think? Is it really about getting people to contribution? Is contribution just sort of a left turn on this? Does this make sense to you? I don't know. I'm curious what you think about this.
I feel like they've probably written this up. So I'm actually looking up the the write-up right now, because this is probably a better question for Patrick Woods, who came up with this model. But I agree with you on principle, at least in the open source context. The number of people who contribute are far less than the number of people who advocate for a thing, and maybe that should be the inner circle. I would say that it's less linear, because the whole point is that you can jump in and out of different orbits, depending on your life situation or just whatever project you're working on. That's totally fine. It's not considered a failure. Yeah, I don't know if Dougie has any other thoughts.
I do have some thoughts, because I know Patrick and I know Josh pretty well, and I have been able to rub shoulders with them. So the founders of the Orbit model, or the Orbit company as well. And I talked to Patrick on his podcast, which is called Developer Love. In episode 1, you can hear way more detail of what I go into and right now. But the one thing that I had to figure out when I joined GitHub as a developer advocate, and at the time we had advocates, but no one actually had the title at the time at GitHub. So I was given the reins to do developer relations at GitHub, figure out what that meant. And at that time, I had to sort of figure out also what that meant, but also give a talk at DevRelCon, because we had a speaking slot. And I call myself the Beyonce of GitHub, and I do that tongue in cheek, and I joke around about that. But I do that because, like, I don't play Beyonce's music all day, every day. Like, I don't know how to play the backing tracks on bass or anything like that. So I'm not really contributing in that sense, but I will tell you about Beyonce and tell you her story. And I think it's the same thing with open source. Like, I made a contribution to Node.js back in November. It was a really painful process. I learned a ton. And my contribution to Node.js was that I write blog posts. I did a contribution on the repo. But the difference is when I get on stage and I show you how to write a script in Node, and I go around and I share on like why Node is still great despite Deno or Dino and all these sort of Rust compiler times, like, I'm still advocating for Node.js. And I think if you can bring more people to the sort of inner circle, I think that's always going to be super helpful. And if you have people who are going to be the mouthpiece, I guess what I'm getting at is, my job at GitHub is not to be the #1 developer advocate in the world. My job is to build more developer advocates. So if you can advocate on GitHub on behalf of GitHub, and I don't have to be involved, then that's an entire automated process. Now, you could argue contributions, I can automate that and just kind of grow and sustain the project. But there are a lot of GitHub projects, open source projects that have lots of contributions that you've never heard of. So like, until someone tells me that exists, or I see it on the trending tab, it's going to be a hard thing to focus on, to try to get more contributors when no one's actually knows about this project.
Right. There's definitely, I mean, that's definitely like a hurdle to be crossed, in terms of just like, where do I even hear about this? I mean, obviously there's you can think of that as, I'm sure, not coming from a marketing background, I'm sure there's entire textbooks about sort of the phase of like, how do I get people to even know that I exist before I, like, how do I wedge the door open long enough for me to attempt to get across, like, and here's why you should care about me. There's a whole phase of just spreading the word.
That's why I think we I do think that we do need technical community builders, whatever we call this thing. They probably need to be technical, because they need to have that technical leadership of like, I authentically went through the same journey that I'm telling you that I'm, hoping that you also go through with me on this. And this is something that non-technical community managers cannot do. So it's like a weird thing where you have to hire someone who like has a software engineering background, or like is it, pay them like a developer, but then put them on non-technical things, which is community is less technical, right? I don't know. It's a weird job. It's
there's like the authenticity to it too as well. Like, I would not know how to be a developer advocate if I wasn't a developer first. So like, I always put myself in the mindset of like, if I had to use this thing and it takes me 12 minutes to get it set up, like I'm probably never going to use it again. So like, how can I advocate on the behalf of this product to make this better? And how can I bring that information back to whoever makes decisions at this project, company, maintainer level or whatnot? And it's just like, I just still think it's one step more than just contributing, keeping the lights on. It's more of like, hey, I want to also bring that feedback. How can I improve this? And I think the roles inside the community, I think technical community manager is a great role because it actually touches all those different pillars, and specifically in the orbit model. I know we're focused on that, but like being able to, turn it on, turn it off, and also know how to listen as well, are very valuable, like attributes that I would love to have on my team at GitHub for sure. And we do have those, by the way. Just want to set the record.
Just to be upfront and clear. So I think we're all dancing around a little bit, sort of the bigger question of what are the qualities, like what does success look like for this role? How has it changed? Like, if we called the role previously developer relations, and now we're calling it this subtly different name around technical community building and sort of the stewardship and the shepherding of a community. What's success? How is success different in this sort of like slightly different like mental model, and what's different in the day-to-day? Like, if previously I was doing DevRel, and that meant I was doing X, Y, and Z with my days in order to succeed at my job and contribute to the success of the business. What does that look like in this sort of new mental framing of community building as opposed to simply developer relations?
Yeah. So I can give a crack at it, and then I'm sure Dougie has other thoughts. At Amazon, I can tell you directly the KPIs that we were reporting, and were sort of to the outside world, that's the only thing that they expect out of us, which is number of views on the content that we produce, right? Very depersonalized. You're just a number to me. Did I get 1,000? Did I get 10,000? Did I get 100,000? I did a better job if it was a bigger number. Great. But there's no relationship there. There's no measurement of quality. Like, did they just like glance at the title, or did they actually read the whole thing and try out the demo? There are different weights for different actions that people can take, and we do try to track that, but it's all a joke. Like, everyone knows that it's kind of a joke. It's a proxy to what we really want, which is people trying you out and seeing if they like you. And short of standing over their shoulders, you can't really get that. So I think what I do like is that Orbit is trying to innovate on that by measuring what they call love, which is just the intensity of activity, which is kind of the same thing but tracked on a per person basis, and suggest and that opens up the possibility of like having more of like a CRM model, which is very much the sales idea of like have an idea of the customer journey from beginning to end, and suggest or automate engagements as they come along on the journey, which is just a lot less transactional. Like, even at Netlify, like I was when you get to the point of like attaching UTM tags to your posts to see the response of your campaigns, that's just, you're just marketing. You're not DevRel. So I definitely care a lot more about the relationship aspect, and how much you can cultivate just by understanding the customer journey rather than treating them as sort of faceless numbers.
Yeah, to add to that too as well, like I'm definitely against trying to look at views and how many people are in the stream right now, because I think that's you've sort of lost it at that point. But I think what success looks like is the names that I see in this chat right now. I see a lot of familiar names. So how many of those familiar names do I see next time? Because those were and I didn't even know this term, tumblers, that you mentioned in your slides, because I've seen this around, but I didn't know what that was. The Party Corgi chat has tumblers, and I didn't know what tumblers were until today. But I guess I have an anecdote too as well from Netlify when I was there, and we were sort of bottom growing, and we had this opportunity to speak and also attend and have a booth at React Rally, and it would have been super easy to say, hey, can you fill out this form, and we'll get your email, and then you have a chance to win, this thing at Netlify. And instead, my approach at that conference, which was like one of the first conferences I ever had any sort of marketing, advertising, whatever. My approach was come to the booth. We had a Nintendo Switch on the booth table, and then we had a bunch of stickers. And the thing was, if you switch to Netlify, which is like, it was a pun really, and then we'll give you a chance to win the Switch. And the step was, all you had to do is scan a QR code and then click the deploy to Netlify button that was on that website. It was a GitHub repo. You click the deploy Netlify button, and then inside the site you deployed from Netlify, after 15 to 30 seconds it took, happened to be a Gatsby site, so we were like on brand for the conference. Then you read the website you just deployed, and the instruction says, click this button to tweet. And if you tweet, that would actually put you in a hashtag, and I had a node server that would then pick a random person. So we did this for 3 days. We gave away the Switch by the second day because we had enough people. I think the conference was like 600, 700, and we had about 325 people who participated. And then after the first day, we knew we engaged the community, because the next day, 2 or 3 people came and said, hey, I clicked the button and then I saw what you deployed, and it was a Gatsby site. And at the time, Gatsby wasn't even 1.0. So like nobody would use Gatsby at that time. And they're like, yeah, I switched my entire blog to Gatsby, and it's hosted on Netlify. So then we know, hey, this person's actually super engaged. This is my next advocate. Like, I'm gonna, whatever you need, I'll give you a sweater, t-shirt, even if you don't win the Switch. Like, I will engage you and give you everything you need to continue down this path. And that was the focus. And like for marketing, it looked great, but we didn't have this sort of traditional fill out this web form. It was this click this button, use the product. If you don't want it, or if you want to delete the repo, by all means. GitHub had, at the time, GitHub had all your information. Like, we weren't even collecting your information. So like the goal was just try it, take it for a test drive, and then if it works out for you, we have this forum, we have this community, we have GitHub issues, like this jump in where you fit in.
Yeah, and then we also, I think, potential enterprise team customers. This was after Brian left, but we also had like a separate process for potential customers to highlight to the sales team, where we actually scanned their badges and took down info, and basically fed in directly to their CRMs or whatever. And that was pretty good, because like we were able to capture a lot of really useful detail that gave our salespeople a really good head start.
Yeah, and you just don't know who you're chatting with too as well, because that story I just shared about being at React Rally, one of the people who walked up and said, hey, this is actually pretty cool. That person was Max Storyber. And Max Storyber, a lot of people know him. He used to actually work at GitHub for a time. He built a whole product, got acquired by GitHub, and now he's at Gatsby as well, coincidentally. But I never met Max. I just knew who he was. I knew of his story. And then we connected, and like, he wasn't like the #1 Netlify fanboy. I'm pretty sure he didn't walk away shipping everything to Netlify, but we made that connection. So every time I had a conversation with Max, or he remembered me, that was like a nice serendipitous moment of like, oh yeah, we met at that one time that when I did that thing. And like, you just can't put a metric to that of like, what big names do you know that will, like at the time Max was like, he wasn't even a big name, but like, you just can't quantify that. You can't put a number to that. You just kind of have to go with it.
I mean, it probably contributed to the React docs being on Netlify as well.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's a domino effect, and there's also like a density effect. Like, one person using it, all right, cool. 2 people, all right, cool. But then like 3 prominent people, then it starts to become a thing, So I like that concentration of like presence, which also points to it being more of a community, right? So yeah. I don't think we gave it like a lot of like numbers. We're just like we just talk about people, which is a very natural thing.
Yeah, and the
That's
one thing I did want to add too, real quick, is that the one thing when I joined GitHub, my biggest goal was I spent 4 years in San Francisco, and I only knew like a handful of GitHub employees. Never went to the GitHub office. And my goal as a GitHub employee today and a developer advocate is I want to be a face to a company that has an Octocat for a face. Like I want you to know who to reach out to, and if it's me or if it's not me, like I'll give you the right person. And that's like one of my goals at GitHub, to be an advocate for getting you in the right
router. You're the
Yeah.
router.
that's interesting. I mean, like, you know, there's a part of my brain in the back, and it's like, you know, like the true win was the friends we made along the way.
That's the
which is
subtitle
saying-
of the blog post.
Exactly. It turns out that it's interesting though that because this role that you just described, this thing exists. It's called an ombudsman. And if you're sort of familiar with this, I think it comes out of the military. Like, you know, this is like the person that the families at home are in touch with in order to, like, you know, reach their loved ones that are deployed wherever and have any concerns or whatever. And so there's a sort of like a name for this role of, like, you know, liaison into the company, an actual human that can, you know, step in and maybe not help you solve your problem directly, but at least point you in the right direction, like, you know, attach you to the person that can actually help you move forward. But you're right in saying that there's like, you know, these aren't, you haven't really given me like hard metrics. Like, you know, if I'm now going to pitch to a company like, hey, here's what I'm going to do for you, they're going to be like, okay, like, you know, what are the OKRs?
Yeah.
What are the KPIs? What is the thing that you're going to be measured on? How do we know if what we're doing is succeeding?
There is a company that actually does that, which is Weaver.ai. They call it community qualified leads, and they take a very salesy model to this, like direct attribution towards sales and marketing and all that. And so yeah, I mean, once you have the tracking system in place, you can absolutely do that. And if you need to quantify in that way, then absolutely. Yeah, you know, I don't necessarily feel that strongly because it tends to become a fight for whoever is the last touch, who gets the most attribution, which makes it a very political thing sometimes between departments and sometimes
that sounds like it's going to set up all the wrong incentives inside your company. Of, like, you know, it's like when you're, like, you know, at a store and you get mobbed by, like, you know, it's like, no, I'm the one who, like, you know, did anybody help you today? Well, like, you know,
yeah, it's like so for me, I don't know if you guys have played Kerbal Space Program.
No.
only heard of it.
Okay, I'll just give you like the rough intuition. When you start off trying to get the rocket from off the ground into orbit, you're very concerned with all the tiny little mechanics of like what degree tilt you're doing, what your yaw is and pitch and whatever, and your velocity and your weight and the stages that you do. But once you're basically kind of at velocity and in space, you then only care about your like DV. I forget what the calculus is, but like you only care about your high level metrics, and you don't actually care about the low level stuff because you're beyond that. You're kind of cruising at a speed where you should just move the big controls that actually matter, and leave the minor attributions to like random noise, or like it's going to bubble up if it actually becomes a problem. And I think that's how large enough communities should be managed. Like as long as your efforts are growing at a decent rate, you can trust that it probably will trickle down to whatever, and you don't really have to be too precise about how exactly you attribute it. That's at least my intuition. It's gonna bother me now that I don't remember it's like DV or something like that. Your delta V, or anyway, I'm sure someone in the chat is yelling at me. I have a question for you guys, if you want to entertain this. So there's a problem in my mind which I haven't resolved, which is this idea of a super user. So at Netlify, we call them Netlif friends. At GitHub, you call them GitHub stars. Stripe has Stripe community experts. These are in AWS has AWS community builders. These are basically unpaid super users, which you give some kind of perks, but they're kind of your external third-party advocates. What do you think about them? How do you make them effective? And basically everyone is new to this game. Like GitHub's Stars program is like a few months old, right? Or maybe a year old.
Yeah, since September.
What's your take on these kinds of programs? Like what's their role compared to you guys?
Yeah, I could speak on partially behalf of GitHub, and something that I've always also put a lot of thought into before I got at GitHub, because I was trying to. It's ironic because I was trying to help build what is now the Netlify Friends, but I just didn't have time before I left to actually see that to what it is today. But I had that same thought of like, what it's kind of the reason I gave that talk on being the Beyonce of GitHub is because Beyonce has a super fan group, and they're called the Beehive.
Beehive, yep.
They're as intense of if you go after Beyonce, the Beehive will show up, and it's not as that intense, but it's like when people came after her after she had the baby, like people
SNL had a really great skit where there was like someone who admitted that they didn't like Beyonce's song, and then the Beehive showed up. It was really cool.
Yeah, and it's the same that we saw with the K-pop stands. Like,
oh man, BTS.
That's a little like more extreme, but like there's a group that will go to bat for you, and like my job is to really go to bat for the Hive. So to answer your question, like success looks like these are the folks that are creating the courses, writing the books. They're on the forefronts of creating the YouTube videos when the thing is announced. Like it's the opportunity to give them as much information as they want. So if they want to monetize it, they can. If they want to grow a community around it, they can. But it's simply like they're doing a good job, and we want to make sure that we're catering to them. Because you don't, if someone's already doing like my job for me, like I am all for, hey, let's have a coffee. Let's learn what are your blockers? How can I unblock you in the future? Or are there any features you're looking to like to ship? Like, let me introduce you to the PM, and let the PM get your feedback directly. So like you just take the company directly to the source of the growth. And that's what I see it as. And I've had similar talks to other leaders of these sort of groups. And that's usually what their goal is like this help empower folks through the people who are empowering the product.
Yeah. I like that.
I'm like strongly reminded of, there's a post from way back in the dinosaur ages about success being a function of being able to grow 1,000 super fans. And that if you can find a way to reach that sort of threshold, and it's thrown out there, I think, in the same sense as, I don't remember who coined the, like, mastery comes at 10,000 hours or something like that, as sort of like a order of magnitude, like when you reach this this tipping point, then that's a signal that, like, what you're doing is working. And maybe this is the kind of metric that we're looking at. It's not views, it's not posts, it's like, how many engaged superfans are we creating? How many people do we have that love the thing that we're doing so much that they're going out of their way to spread that to more people? And looking at that as sort of the like you say about the Kerbal Space Program, sort of like, the gross levers of success, not the little like fine-tuning adjustment dials, but like, the big steering wheel that indicates that, like, we're doing the right thing. I don't know. I mean, this question of, like, what has been the impact of GitHub Stars? This has only existed, I guess, now since Doug, you said since September.
September, yeah.
So this is like a hot minute old, or maybe it's like 1,000 years old. It's unclear.
Yeah, and actually, I think the official launch was September. We actually started formatting this I guess making the formation of the stars around May, June, and I get to have like a very clear impact that I saw from my end, which we watched this feature called the GitHub Profile README. It's a feature everybody has access to, but at the time we had this sort of under wraps and like a super alpha. And we do, for all features at GitHub, we have the staff ship that we call it, which is like alpha or whatever comes before alpha. But that's what how we test our feature. So GitHub employees all leveraged it, and it sort of like came out of nowhere as far as this feature goes. And with my access to it, we were able to get this in front of stars pretty early on, to the point where we actually had a GitHub star who created some content on how to build your profile README. It was like pretty like within a week of launch, and that basically is the de facto tutorial on how to create a profile README, because it was so early. This came out, and this individual, Monica, which I guess I can name them as well, they are now like they're SEO wise, like that's the post. Like it's not the docs.github.com. And like that's success to me. That's like seeing someone win in the sense of content and engagement of the community, and now as a point person when it comes to that feature.
That's actually a really good way. It's like, I know that I've succeeded at this job when when other people's results outrank mine on Google, then success. That's fantastic. We actually have a question here from Jeremy Feel. What's the feedback feedback loop for these super users? There's sort of a follow-on question there. Should the company be monitoring the output to manage their message? I'd argue that you can't manage other people's message, otherwise you have to pay them a salary. But there is sort of a question, if this is part of what you're trying to do as a community builder, is to build up this frontline, like top tier set of super fans. How do you help them succeed at that? Like, what ammunition are you giving them? And how can you influence, I guess, sort of like what they're doing? It's like, I launch a new feature. What I really want is for my super fans to go out there and create content that shows off, like, what this new feature can do, maybe use it in ways that I didn't even think of, show how it fits into like a million different workflows. And each of those super fans also, they have another foot into whatever communities they came from. So, you say like React, Svelte, Vue, whatever, all these front-end frameworks, I'm going to have super fans from all of these different sort of walks of life. And each one of them is going to take the new thing that I did and show, like, this is how it matters to the Vue community. This is how it matters to the whatever community. And that's, I think, a very different thing. So what do you both think about that?
I like it.
Yeah, I don't know if you had connections to the AWS community builders when you're at AWS, Swyx.
Yeah. We I nominated some. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So at GitHub, we mentioned the GitHub stars, but we have other groups as well. Like we have some members of our support team that also have a support community. GitHub's very, like, we have 56 million developers worldwide, which sounds like a flex. It is, but it means that we just have multiple groups. So another group that you might not know we have is we have a group of open source maintainers that we talk to on a regular basis. And it's actually a structured conversation in a group. And we get feedback from some of the largest open source projects that you've heard of. And it's very important for us to actually treat them with this, not treat them, I was going to say treat them with respect, but it really is respecting their time, getting their feedback directly to the source of the people who can actually impact that feedback into our platform. But as far as structure goes, the structure looks like we have a monthly meeting with all the stars. Everybody's invited. And we call these the stars insight calls, and like the PMs will show up and talk about some really early ideas of features, and they get to see the feature sort of develop over the course of time until it's ready for beta. And at that point, stars are like, oh, I knew this was coming out. I'll use this. I'll incorporate this in my team at work, or I'll write some content, whatever you want to do with that. You just have some interactions. And that's why we did the stars conference, which is, again, it wasn't a huge public event. It was more just for the stars. So to the point where I think I've even used Swyx. You mentioned like, oh, I didn't even know this was a thing. I never heard of this before. And I was like, because yeah, we just did it. And it's only for the stars. It's not meant to promote GitHub in any way. It's just to give you access to all the information.
We even had an astronaut swing by.
Yeah, we did have an astronaut from NASA. Yeah. But in addition to that, like we do give you opportunity to have some unfiltered conversations too as well. So one of the requirements for stars is to sign an NDA, and it's just so we can have some really free-form conversation about GitHub, the platform, but also complaints, wins, everything across the board.
Radical candor.
Yeah. I mean, I like it. It's hard to organize. I think it's a full-time job actually if you do it, if you want to do a good job of it, you know. And again, points to this thing becoming, because it probably is not I mean, I don't know who handles it, but it's probably not developer relations handling it. It's just like a
It is
grow.
developer relations.
Oh, it is. Okay. Yeah, you know, I think this is a growing field where we're all sort of defining what different categories of activities we can invest in. This is one of them. Another trend I see a lot is people building universities, like Apollo building an Odyssey, Netlify building Jamstack Explorers. I forget who
Automation
else.
Academy from Angie.
Angie, yeah, well, she's the OG.
Yeah.
And then you know, GitHub has had labs, or I forget what you guys call it.
We do have
some
the
workshop.
lab.github.com.
Yeah. I tried to go through it for actions, but I didn't really get very far, to be honest. But I think you know, like, people are building like LMSs, like custom LMSs for their learning, and I think that's another investment in community. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to ramble. I just, like, these are all really cool trends where I think you know, it's part of the whole future of DevRel thesis, I guess. Yeah.
Fantastic. We are at time, even a little bit over time. So I think we could probably keep jamming on this for a while. I'm going to throw up a banner on screen. There's a thread in Octo discussions where if people have questions, or maybe Swyx, if you can drop some interesting resources in that thread.
Yeah, I'll be there.
So folks who are maybe coming at this later from the YouTube recording, or who didn't get a chance to ask a question, you know, and think about it later when they're like, oh, falling asleep. Oh, wow, I should have asked this. Can drop in and ask those questions and get some follow-up engagement. Thanks so much for joining us, Swyx, especially because it's like, it's tomorrow in the middle of the night in Singapore. It's unclear to me what time it is. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, B. Dougie, for joining me here on the OCTO Speaker Series. This has been a blast, and have a lovely day.
Thanks for having me. All right, bye.